Hello, everyone. I'm Janet Tarantino, author of Dying to See, Revelations about God, Jesus, Our Pathways, and the Nature of the Soul. And I'd like to welcome you today to my YouTube channel called Exploring Everything Spiritual. Please click the like button below and feel free to share any video on my YouTube channel. And don't forget to subscribe below to see future amazing videos about everything spiritual. My guests today are Jeffrey Olsen and his son, Spencer. First, let me tell you a little bit about the two of them. Jeff Olsen is a best-selling author who inspires audiences internationally with his intriguing story of perseverance and inner strength. After a horrific automobile accident took the lives of his wife and youngest son, also inflicting multiple life-threatening injuries to Jeff, including amputation of his left leg, he found the courage to survive over 18 surgeries and eventually heal both physically and emotionally. At the time of his accident, Olsen had incredible out-of-body and near-death experiences, bringing him insights not common in today's world. Jeff has integrated these experiences with many healing modalities and now shares those with others as he works to bring forth awareness, healing, and oneness. Spencer Olsen is Jeff's oldest son, who also survived their family's horrific accident, yet sustained much less serious physical injuries. Emotionally, however, his journey is no less inspiring as he took on the reality of all that happened as a 7-year-old boy. Spencer was Jeff's motivation and his hero during those years of recovery, and he continues to inspire not only his immediate family, but many others now as an adult. Spencer is a talented craftsman and a gifted musician. He and his wife, Ashley, live in Layton, Utah, and enjoy the magnificent mountains and easy access to the outdoors surrounding their homes. It sounds beautiful. Both Spencer and Jeff have recently completed a children's book, Where Are You?, which outlined the grief, discovery, and healing process through the eyes of a child based on Spencer's recollections as a child, an adolescent, and into adulthood. Jeff is the author of a new book, I Knew Their Hearts. Well, not a new book. That was one of your first ones, wasn't it, Jeff?
Yeah, that was the first one. That was the first book.
Yeah, and then Beyond Mile Marker 80, and Knowing. I'd like to welcome both Jeff and Spencer to my program today because I'm filled with gratitude that you're here today to share your story with the audience. Thank you for being here.
Oh, it's such an
honor for having us.
Thank you very much.
You bet. Jeff, I'll let you lead your story and Spencer can pop in to share his accounts of the collision as well. How does that sound?
That sounds awesome. And we are honored to have Spencer with us. And Janet,
Yes.
it's just an honor for us to be on your show and to be with you.
Thank you.
And, I'll be somewhat brief, but it takes some explanation of what happened. And certainly if you want to read more about it, Knowing is the latest book, and it's actually a compilation of the first two. So if you get Knowing, you get the first two books, but with deeper insights and extended chapters, and Knowing gives you kind of the definitive experience right up until recent times, because there's an aftermath to these things. And I think sometimes we focus on the near-death experience, but the life experience might be what's far more important and far more relatable. But Spencer and I were in a horrible automobile accident. It's been 24 years now. So it's been a couple decades ago, and I couldn't even speak of it for years. In fact, I didn't speak of it for almost a decade. Immediate family and my closest friends knew about what had happened, but it was it was painful. It was personal. It was just something I didn't share, and I believe I was processing a lot of what had happened. But it was a family road trip, basically. We had been on a family vacation. We had gone down to visit my wife's family. It was the Easter weekend, and it was the Monday morning that we were heading back home. It was going to be about a 5-hour drive. And, we had said our goodbyes and hugged everyone. I put the kids in the car. Spencer was just a little 7-year-old at that time. Now he's a full-grown man. And it was he and his little brother, my youngest son, Griffin, So the two boys, me and my wife, and we were driving from southern Utah down in the beautiful Red Rock country up into northern Utah, northern Utah into the Alpine Mountains where we still live now. And it was interesting on that drive home. There was a moment that I just glanced in the rearview mirror. And I talk a lot about moments, but this was one of those things I'll never forget. I mean, I was driving, I had the cruise control set at 75 miles an hour, and I simply glanced in the rearview mirror just to look at traffic, but in that glance, in that moment, it's almost like time stood still. The first thing I noticed was Griffin, my little toddler son. And I saw that he was sound asleep in his car seat, sleeping peacefully. But in that brief glance, it just hit me. I thought, wow, there's our miracle boy. We were told we may not have more children, and there he is. And I noticed beautiful details like how long his eyelashes were and how peaceful he was. And it was just a glance. And in that same moment, I heard Spencer, who was just 7 at the time, and he was playing with action figures that he had gotten in his Easter basket and was having, all the glorious sounds of the most, intense lightsaber battle in the universe. And I was just filled with such joy in my sons, and I looked over at my wife, Tamara, Spencer's mother, who had also reclined her seat back, and she was sound asleep. Both she and Griffin had fallen asleep, but she was still holding onto my hand. And in that brief moment, I thought, wow, we're 10 years into a marriage. We've got 2 boys. We're pursuing our careers and raising a family. And she's still holding my hand, just like she did the first time I had a few extra bucks and took her to a $1 movie on campus. I was a starving college student. But it was that brief moment of gratitude. And I'll never forget that, because as the day played out, and it was probably about an hour after that I lost control of the car. Now there was reports of crosswinds. There was reports of a red pickup truck that was driving erratically on the interstate. One of the most difficult things about the story is I believe what happened is I may have dozed off. I may have just nodded off briefly, and in doing so, swerved to the right, overcorrected to the left, and I lost control of the car. And the car began to roll, not off the road, but down the concrete at 75 miles an hour. It was a horrific accident, and I blacked out for most of the accident. But the first thing I heard when the car came to a stop, I wasn't blacked out. I was completely conscious. But the first thing I heard was Spencer, who's with us tonight, as a 7-year-old boy, crying hysterically in the back seat. And as a father, I thought, I've got to get to my boy. I've got to get to him. But that's when I realized that I couldn't move. I was pinned either to the floorboard or the seat. I couldn't tell. There was all the broken glass. There was the rancid smell of the gasoline. And I was not aware of my injuries. But what had actually happened to me is that both of my legs were crushed. My left leg was eventually amputated above the knee. My back was damaged and broken, and the vertebrae cracked. It didn't damage my spinal column, but my rib cage had been banged up. My lungs were collapsing. My right arm had almost been torn off, and then the seatbelt had cut through and ruptured all my insides. I was in a horrible physical state. But I wasn't aware of that. I knew I was in pain. I knew I was struggling to breathe, but here was my son crying, and I wanted to get to him. But that's when I realized that no one else was crying. That's when the brutal reality hit that Tamara, my wife, was gone. She was killed instantly in the accident. And Griffin, Spencer's little brother and my youngest son at the time, his car seat had come apart, and he also had been killed instantly in the accident. It was the darkest moment of my life. And I suppose that's why it took years for me to even talk about it. And yet I don't share that to be graphic or morbid in any way, but that was the setting. Here I am trapped in the car, I'm losing consciousness, Spencer's hysterical in the back seat, and I'm beginning to lose it. Like I can't breathe, the pain's intense. And in that dark moment is when light came. And I don't, words are difficult, but light came, like light came and surrounded me and was comforting me in this darkest moment of my life. And it felt as if I began to rise above the accident. And an interesting thing happened because suddenly I could breathe. It's like, oh, I'm not in pain. I can breathe. I'm okay. And I was literally thinking, how could I possibly be okay? And Tamra, my wife, who I knew was deceased at the scene, suddenly she was in that light with me. She was right there with me in that light. But she was very much alive, glorious, beautiful, and we began to communicate. And she was saying, Jeff, you can't come, you got to go back. And we had a conversation about if I left, Spencer would be orphaned. And I learned a lot about choice in that moment, because there I was looking at the woman I loved more than life. And yet I knew I had a little boy in the backseat of that car. And I made a choice to come back. And I'm gonna pause there for a minute and maybe pass it over to Spencer, because this, here was my experience. Gosh, I basically was killed in the accident too, but now I'm in this glorious light. My wife, who I knew was deceased, is alive and well, and we're communicating. And I'll get to what it was like to come back and what happened as my spirit entered the hospital. But Spence, why don't you just share a little bit what that was like for you? And I know that's painful and difficult, but as a little boy, a 7-year-old, and what was going on around you while I was having this out-of-body near-death experience?
Sure. So for me, it was quite a bit different. For the accident, I was fully conscious for all of it. I remember being on the road, and then at some point, my mom shouting out, and then the car began to spin. And I remember everything kind of slowed down. It was almost as if I was kind of experiencing it frame by frame, just kind of seeing like the very toys that I was playing with earlier flying around me. And then, eventually we came to a halt. And I remember there was this moment in time where it was just like everything was still, and it was kind of like life had stopped, or time had stopped, in the sense that I was all alone. My dad did say a few words to me before I assume he lost consciousness, but he just said, he could hear me crying, I'm sure. And so at that point, I remember him saying, it's going to be okay, son. And that gave me a little bit of comfort. But, I was just panicked. And eventually there was people that came to the car and rescued me and gave me the basic, how many fingers am I holding up? What's your address? What are the ABCs? Count to 10. And I was seen to and put on onto the ambulance. But I think just as a whole, it was from there that, me and my dad were taken to the local hospital, and then later we were life flighted out. But throughout the whole duration, just felt like I was alone. And I think so many people can feel that way. And even if it's in retrospect, they have to look back, like no one's, we all have moments in our life where we're alone, or we may feel alone. But it's through that experience that we all may have and do have at times that unites us.
Yeah, thank you, Spence. And I know that was horrific for a little boy. And You know, it's interesting as a father. I mean, it was that's why I came back. I mean, I was having this communication. It's like, boy, I've got to get back to my son. And I made that choice. And Spencer outlined it. I don't have any concept of time in this bubble of light, but yes, people arrived at the scene. I had to be extricated from the car, and we were rushed to a local hospital. The state of my injuries, I had to be airlifted and life flighted to the nearest level 1 trauma center. And Spencer was also life flighted in just to, I mean, we were in a little teeny town that just didn't have the capabilities in their local hospital to deal with what had happened. But gosh, I was unaware of any of that. I just knew I had crashed the car. I had been with my wife in this other realm, in this light. I had said the most profound goodbye I'd ever say. And then I found myself moving about the hospital, you know, encountering the doctors and nurses and the families of the patients and other patients. I mean, I was moving about freely and seeing everything and everyone in a busy level 1 emergency, you know, room trauma center. But boy, was I seeing them. I mean, gosh, everybody I saw, I knew them perfectly. I knew their love, I knew their hate, I knew their motivations, their passions, their worries, I knew them as if they were me. I mean, I felt as if I was them. There was this connection that I now call the oneness. And there was so much love and honor. These were strangers, so to speak, but I was so connected. And they were a part of me. And, you know, I grew up in a conservative Christian home, and even a biblical verse came up as I'm looking and seeing all these people and feeling them. It was the verse, you know, in Matthew where Jesus says, inasmuch as you've done it unto the least of these, you've done it unto me. And I used to believe that was a nice verse about being nice, right? But there was this whole higher consciousness. Suddenly it's like, oh, wow, they are me, you know? And I believe when the master spoke of that, he was saying, you know, I am the beggar on the street. I am the man in prison. I am all of it. And that's what I felt like. I was all of it. I was connected to all of it, even everybody, until I came to my own body, which I didn't even recognize. I just thought, wow, that's a mess. And I stepped closer to look, and that's when I realized, wow, that's me. But it wasn't me. I was having this beautiful, connected experience, but that was my body. And it was a mess. And I knew I was to get back in, to go back in the body. And gosh, there's a lot in the book knowing about that, but looking at my body and realizing what a miracle machine our bodies are. And I had taken that all for granted. You know, I realized my body literally was the temple, but boy, it was broken. And yet I went back in. And again, intention, our thoughts are so powerful. I didn't have to think about, well, how do I get back in there? It was just the intention, I'm going back in. But boom, then I was back into the body, to the trauma, the grief. I mean, the guilt, the regret, the pain, all of it returned in such a heavy, intense way. It was horrible to be back in the body. And I was ventilated. They had a big, you know, tube down my throat doing the breathing from my lungs, which had collapsed, and my legs were immobile. My right arm was immobile. They eventually tied down my left arm because I kept grabbing at all the medical supplies. And I learned a lot about being still. I would have 18 surgeries in total. I was in the hospital for 5 months, you know, in rehab for, gosh, almost a year after that. You know, the amputation, the colostomy bag, all the things to put my body back together. And I worried about Spencer so much, and I grieved so hard. Now, you know, Spencer wasn't even allowed to see me at first. I mean, they had to leave my whole abdominal cavity open because of the infections and what was going on. And, you know, I mean, I was in ICU, and, you know, eventually he was able to come see me, but he was staying with my younger brother and his wife. They'd just taken him in. And Spence, I'm going to pass it back over to you, because in the hospital, I was literally just fighting to survive. I was just fighting to stay alive. But what was that like from your little boy perspective to go and live with your aunt and uncle? And I mean, what was that like on your end?
Well, and it may sound contradictory, but I mean, even living with family, I still felt alone because I know, I had a lot of dreams at that time, some to do with the post-traumatic stress, but
Yeah.
I remember this one dream that I had where I saw my mom and my dad, and they were getting into a red Corvette, and then they drove off into the sunset, but they left me behind. And I felt like, yeah, what a good way to sum up how I felt. It may not have been the truth, but that's definitely how I felt, as I felt very much alone, and just not being understood. At school, there was kids that didn't really know my situation, and I probably could have articulated it better, but I even remember having my arm in a cast and people kind of asking me what happened and kind of, just poking fun like kids do. But I remember just feeling like no one really understood the trauma, or they really understood the severity of the situation, which, I mean, we were just kids. Of course they didn't. I didn't understand it, but I felt very much alone.
Yeah.
Now, how
Yeah.
long were you in the hospital, Spencer?
So post my dad, who was in there for maybe 6 months, I was in there for 6 days, a week.
That's a lot for a child, though.
Yeah, I mean, I was in there for the first day or two, or maybe 3 days. I didn't get out of my bed, and so I literally had to learn how to walk again, which I guess is kind of another metaphor for this trauma we went through, was just learning how to walk again. But yeah, 2 or 3 days in, I started walking again, and I had a broken arm and a few broken ribs, and cut up a little bit. But other than that, it was not a lot of physical damage to me.
During
Yeah.
the accident, you said you saw flashes going by of the different things that were happening. Did you feel pain as you were seeing that, or did you feel any pain afterwards?
That's a good question. I remember the only way I could articulate it as a child was that I felt like I was getting boxed around by a pro boxer. So that was how much I could kind of conceptualize the pain. But I think the shock helped a lot, because it was probably after that a lot of the pain was, but it's kind of foggy now, the memory. I don't know how long I was kind of numb to pain, because as you asked me that question, I don't know if I've really thought about that. And I don't know if it was worse. I know I was protected during it. I didn't feel the pain too much, but
Yeah.
if anything, definitely after, I suppose.
Yeah, most people, because I was in an automobile accident too, and I felt the jolt of changing direction, but I didn't feel any pain whatsoever until after the accident was over. A lot of people worry about what did they feel, they were so worried about their loved one, what they felt going through the accident, when most of the time it happens so fast you don't feel anything at all. How long were you in alone, basically, and did you sit in the car until the ambulance got there? Because it had to be a few minutes before they got there, I'm sure.
Definitely, yeah. So again, like I said, time kind of froze. There was no real solid concept of time, but could have been 5-15 minutes, or could have been 5 minutes. Anyways, it felt like an eternity for sure, just waiting for someone to show up. But then, yeah, eventually someone did show up and got me out of the car. So yeah, I stayed in the car the whole time.
Okay. I just was curious if you actually blacked out and didn't realize it, is what my
Oh, okay.
might have been.
Yeah, as far as I can, yeah, I don't think I did.
Okay. And Jeff, you were going to say something then? I'm sorry.
Well, it's interesting, even for me, and Spencer and I have talked about this, but we didn't talk about it a lot. I mean, after the accident, it was so painful, to talk about. Half the family was gone. And for me, the physical injuries were nothing compared to the emotional injuries. and the grief, and the worry. It's like, wow, what's going to become of my my little 7-year-old boy? I mean, he's my oldest son, but I think it's interesting that I had these things, these near-death experiences, these out-of-body experiences, very, very spiritual things that sustained me. Otherwise, I don't know where I'd be or how I'd survived. I really look up to Spencer because I'm like, you didn't have any of that. And yet, he came through it in a magnificent way. And I think, even at the end of my hospital stay, like once I had this initial near-death experience, it's as if the door never really closed. I mean, I remember at the end of my hospital stay, and this is after, I had been through ICU, and I'd go to surgical recovery, back to ICU. I kept throwing pulmonary emboli, or the blood clots that lodge in your lungs, and I would almost die again, and then I would get over that. And but eventually I was through surgical recovery. I was in the rehabilitation wing of the hospital, and Spencer was coming on a regular basis then to see me. And I was so thrilled, to see him. But gosh, I had one leg, my other leg was in a brace. My arm was all in a sling. I was a mess, and they were attempting to get me in an electric wheelchair so I could be mobile. And, I still had the colostomy and all the abdominal stuff going on. I had laid so long on my back that the back of my head was bald. I had rubbed all the hair off the back of my head from just laying into bed so long. And I know I looked, atrocious. I mean, Spencer not only lost his mother and his little brother, in many ways, he lost his dad. I was the rough and tumble, dad, and not anymore. I mean, I was barely hanging on, even though I was going to get better. That was the thing. We knew at this point I was going to make it. But it was at the end of my hospital stay that I had another profound experience. And again, I was finally able to lay on my side. They had stabilized my abdominal injuries, and my brothers were giving me a bad time about my head being bald. And I fell into a deep sleep. In fact, I even remembering, wow, I'm sleeping so peacefully. I haven't slept in months. I mean, I would be unconscious, and I know I rested, and at this point I was off of all the narcotics. I was off of morphine and all the lower tab and that stuff. I was taking some Tylenol, but I went into a deep sleep, and I felt that light come again, that beautiful light that surrounded me. And I was grieving so miserably. And it felt as if I was rising above the hospital bed, except this time the light dispensed. It moved away like fog off a lake, and I was in the most beautiful, glorious place. I mean, people say heaven, the other side, the spirit world. There's only one word that comes close to what I experienced, and I was home. I was home. And I began to run, and it was odd that the experience was so physical. I was running, and and it was super sensory. I could feel the energy of the ground beneath my feet. I could feel intelligence, and I had both feet in this experience. I was running, and I could feel the intelligence in my calves and thighs, and I was gleefully running, just thinking, I'm home. And then I had the knowing that I wasn't there to stay. And about that same time, there was this corridor off to my left, and I knew intuitively I'm to go this way, which I did. I began to make my way down the corridor. And as I did, at the end of the corridor, I could see a crib. Now, Griffin, my youngest son, he was still sleeping in a crib. He was just a toddler when we had the accident. And I raced to this crib, and I looked in it. And there was my little boy. There was he sleeping as beautifully and peacefully as when I peeked in the rearview mirror. And I swept him up, and I held him. And if you've ever picked up a sleeping child, the weight and the heat of them. And I held him against me, and I was marveling, like, how is this so physical? I could feel him against me. I could feel his breath on my neck. I could feel his little back breathing, and I was weeping, thinking, he's okay. He's okay. In fact, I leaned over, and I smelled his hair. And I don't know if you've ever smelled the hair of a lover. I'm like, it's him. It's my little boy. And I just began to weep as I held him. And as that was happening, I felt this presence behind me, this overwhelming, intense, cosmic, powerful presence. And I began to become fearful because I thought, that's God. And in my belief system, life was a test, and here I had failed, and God was going to judge me. And in fact, the guilt and regret, I was thinking, my little boy's here because I screwed up and crashed the car. I lost control, and his life was cut short, and this presence was coming closer and closer, and I was fearful. And the thought I had as I wept, holding my little boy that was alive and well, was, I hope there's some way I can be forgiven. And as I had that thought, and this felt physical as well, these divine arms just wrapped around and held us both. And then the whole lid came off. Then it was like well, in fact, the first message back was, there's nothing to forgive. Everything's in divine order. And I just began to weep, and there was this download of love and peace and gratitude and truth. I saw things so much different. I did see my life, I had the life review, as I've learned it's called, and I saw my life, I saw the things, and I was saying, well, that was a mistake. I didn't mean to do that. And this beloved divine creator communicated, there are no mistakes. Your life is perfect for your soul's expansion. And I thought, what? And yet it was it just resonated. And I said, well, that was wrong, and I knew it was wrong, and I did it anyway. And the message from this divine being was, that's your judgments of it, not ours. And it was a beautiful multiplicity thing, because what was communicated is, we love you as much as the child you hold. You are as beloved, you are as perfect, you are as divine as this child you hold. That's how you are to us. And it was a very personal experience, but I knew it magnified out to all of humanity, that we're all, the overwhelming unconditional love was so intense. And I stood in all that peace and that beauty. And I learned again about choice. It was communicated, you can be mad at God your whole life and think that, half your family was torn away, and you can blame, the divine, or you can beat yourself up the rest of your life in the guilt that you were driving the car. But it was interesting, I was given a third choice. I was told, or you can exercise your will. And again, with my upbringing, I said, well, it's your will be done, is it not? And what was communicated is that your will is my will. That's how much we love you. And I was told, you can give your son, you can release him, you can exercise your will and give him back, and not feel as if it was all torn away. And in all that love and all that peace and all that beauty, I was able to kiss my little boy and give him back. And then I came back, I came to myself. I woke up, if you will. I was back in the hospital bed to the injuries, the amputation, the arm, the shoulder, all of it, the wheelchair. And I was only weeks from coming home. In fact, this probably happened just a few weeks before I was to return home. And that was troubling too. Here I was going to be going, and I wasn't going to go home to my house. I was going to go to my brother's house where Spencer had been staying. And I had months of rehab and home health, and gosh, they had cleared out the extra bedroom and put a hospital bed in there for me. And my family was incredible during all of this. But I'll never forget the day going home. And my brothers are my heroes. They were there at the hospital. I think they almost lost their jobs to just come and sit with me, but they were going to bring me home, and they would have to lift me into this electric wheelchair, and they had taught me how to drive it. And we were heading home, and I was so worried about Spencer. I was like, gosh, how's he going to deal with this? It's one thing to visit me in the hospital, but now we're going to the home turf. Like, we're going to have to go to the grocery store at some point. And I looked horrible, and one leg lopped off, the other one in the brace, and this arm all bound up. And anyway, as we pulled up to the house, I could see Spencer looking out the window, watching as his uncles, my brothers, lifted me out of the car and put me in the wheelchair. And I began to make my way to the ramp. They'd put a ramp, so, they were emphatic that I do it myself. And so I was driving up to the ramp, and Spencer came running out of the house, and he ran toward me, but then he ran right past me. And I thought, I knew this was going to be hard. I knew this is too much. And I continued to navigate up. And as I turned to go up the ramp, I just looked to see where he went. And here was this little 7-year-old boy. He'd run across the street, and he was knocking on all the neighbors' doors, and he was saying, "Come out, come out. My dad has made it home. Come see my dad." And I just fell apart. I sat there weeping, and then he did run, and he threw himself on my lap, which just about killed me, because I still had all the sutures and everything from the abdominal repairs. And I share this for a specific reason, because he threw his arms around me, and I was crying, and I said, "Look, I'm going to work so hard to get well, but I'm going to be like this for a while. Are you going to be okay with this?" And we laughed. Now, he said, "Dad, if you were nothing but a puddle of blood, I would still love you." I thought, well, and the reason I share this is there was this profound realization. It's like, wow, here I am in a wheelchair holding my surviving son. And it was no less divine than being in those other realms holding my son that had passed. Suddenly, heaven was right here. There was nowhere to go. There was nothing to become. It was simply to be in that perfect moment and realize that love, the unconditional love of a child was as profound as the unconditional love of a creator. And it changed me. And I'm just thrilled Spencer can be with us tonight. I'm going to quiet down, and certainly, Janet, we're happy to take questions. And Spencer, I'm sure, do you want to add anything to that? It was interesting, this journey where I was drawing on the near-death experience and these spiritual things that had happened as I was attempting to heal and move forward. You didn't have any of that. And how did you cope? Because I always drew back on that. Well, I know they're alive and well. I got to say goodbye to both of them. I know we're going to make it. I know there's a divine, greater power that's involved here. But what was it like for you not having had any of that?
I mean, it was hard. I still remember after that when we moved back in the house, and I remember having mornings where I'd wake up and was just hoping, that it was all a dream, and then I'd wake up and they'd be downstairs. But for me, I think it was a lot longer of a journey. And as I grew up, I did have experiences that definitely stand out, but they were more subtle and had to be realized upon hindsight, I think, because I had the experience. For example, when I was like a teenager, I had a dream where it was very visceral, and basically in the dream I was being judged for just my life, nothing in particular, just I felt this harsh judgment of like a priest, and felt like I wasn't living up to who I could be, and at the end of the day, what happened was my mom came to me in that dream and basically told me that, there was no words. It was more just communicated to me through thoughts that she loved me no matter what, and that she'd always be there for me. And so I had that experience, but I just later kind of chalked it up to, I don't know what, just a figment of my imagination, I guess. And so I'd had that experience. I'd also, had an experience when I was a child where I wanted to understand what is God. And I remember my dad just saying to me, well, if you want to understand that, pray about it. And so I was like, okay, whatever, Dad. And so I did. And I just remember that evening, waking up in the middle of the night. My legs were sore, like my calves were sore, and my light was glaring, in my face, I was like, who turned on my light? Like, what's going on? And so the next day I was like, Dad, did you turn on my light? Like, what are you doing? What are you trying to pull? You told me to pray about God and then you turn my lights on and everything. He's like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. And so it's just, and growing up kind of through the tumultuous years of being a teenager, I kind of just chalked that up to mere coincidence and disregarded it and kind of had to go back and uncover it. And so for me, it's been a journey of just, going through different modalities of just being able to understand that we're all the same. We're all different, but we're all the same. I could be just as likely to be my dad or say anybody else if I was born into, their family with their circumstances, with their, physical body. We essentially might handle life just the exact same as someone. So we don't really have any room to judge, but rather just to come from a place of, I suppose, compassion and understanding. But yeah, I've just kind of had to draw on that unity and understanding that, we're all in this boat together. So, don't poke holes in it.
Yeah, I love that about you, son, because, Spencer's one of the most compassionate people I know. And I'm kind of saying, well, I know that there's more because I experienced it. And I've watched Spencer kind of say, well, I don't know all about that, but I can be God's love. I can be God's light here. Spencer's worked with, big brothers, big sisters, and after school music programs where he might have 10-year-olds up on stage, smashing out Metallica, but it's human expression and it's healing. And I'm just very proud of the man he's become because he is kind and compassionate and has empathy based on the rocky journey he's traveled. And Janet, I don't know if there's time. Spencer's written a book. He and I worked on a book, and Spencer basically wrote this book. I could read it in 5 minutes if there's time. Do we have time to just review the book real quick?
Sure, I'm fine with that.
Well, let me pull it up here and tell me if you guys see it.
I see it perfectly.
Okay, very good. And it's still there, okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, the book is called Where Are You? And it's, by Spencer and I, but this is written from the perspective of Spencer as a child, perhaps, but I think this comes down to a universal thing. In all of our uniqueness, this may be universal. And I've, even when I continued to read this and was editing it, I thought, gosh, this could be not only about a loved one that's passed, but maybe about the divine itself. But it's dedicated to the children who've lost loved ones and deserve answers. Where are you? You left so quickly that I wondered where you went. Are you in the stars? Are you in the flowers and the grass? Are you in the trees? Are you in the scarf that still smells like your hair? Sometimes I wonder if you were ever real. I had a dream of you, but when I woke up, you were still gone. I looked for you on Sunday, but Monday came. Are you in the garden? Are you in the mountains? Are you in the clouds? I remember the banana bread you made and the music you played. Maybe that's where you are, in the music, in those spaces between the notes. I do my best to remember, but then sometimes I wish I could forget. I think I can picture your face, but it feels like it's slipping away. And yet it's even more unreal, or it feels unreal to me the way life was before you left. And yet it's even more unreal how life is now without you. I've looked for you everywhere, yet you still feel so gone, and nothing I can do will bring you back. Sometimes, though, when I'm calm and think of you, I can almost feel you, like you're right beside me. Maybe that's where you are, right beside me. Or maybe even closer, perhaps you are alive within me. Are you alive within me? If so, then you are right here in what I see, in what I touch, in what I hear, and even in what I taste. You're the whisper, not the one I hear in my ears, but the one I hear in my heart, the whisper I feel beyond hearing. That whisper takes me to a place deep within myself, a place where we can meet like a dream. Wow, that's where you are. You are within me. You live in my heart. You are alive in my memory, so you live in everything around me. Yes, now I see you. There you are. You are in the stars, the trees, the flowers, the grass, the scarf, the garden, the sky, the mountains, the music. You're alive within me. And because of that, we are both alive within everything. Now I see you everywhere. Thanks for inspiring me to look. Watch over me, okay? The end, but as you can see, there is no end. You have angels, and that's the book. We're going to be offering that over the holidays. If anyone wants it, there's some Venmo and PayPal things there, or an email address. I don't know if you want to screenshot that or whatever, but we can send you a beautiful printed one. It's spiral bound, so it lays flat for kids to look at, and $25 will handle the book and all the shipping if anyone's interested. But anyway, Spence, you inspire me as my son, and the way you put that together and the way I've watched you come to terms with things without the near-death or the spiritual experience. And in many ways, I think that path is far more noble than mine, having left this realm and come back. And yet in the end, it's all about love. That's all there is love. And gosh, Janet, I don't know, what can we do? Do you want to ask questions? I mean, we're just here at your convenience.
And Dad, sorry, I did just want to say that your mere existence inspires me, because given what happened, just seeing how people handle tragedy and trauma, you did a damn good job. So,
well, you're kind.
You're just an inspiration that way.
We're having a love fest.
I'm glad you stuck around.
I'm not going anywhere.
Well, I would say the same thing to you, Spencer, because look at the wisdom. You're a perfect example where bad things that happen in life make you the person that you are, and the wisdom and the empathy that you gained through all these experiences have made you a gift to the world. So that goes the same for you. So
thanks.
Yeah.
I mean, we're all gifts. Isn't it beautiful that
true.
Everyone in their unique way? I mean, we've laughed about, there's this big, wide universe, this universe, this one song, and each and every one of us have a tone or a note to sing within that chorus, and it's not complete without all of us, and our uniqueness is what makes it so beautiful. The perfection is in the chaos, and that was the view of the near-death experience, but it's certainly the view in the life experience when we look around us and see, the blessings in what we have, rather than focusing on everything that's lost.
Exactly, because some people can say, "You've done this to me," and they, will not grow up with the positive outlook that they should. So yeah, adversity makes us some of the best people too. I wanted to ask you though that when you were in the hospital, because I've read your book, and your wife came while you were there, and she hovered above you, correct? And she was some Jeff O'Driscoll was the doctor, and there was also some nurses in the hospital that saw her, correct?
Yeah, that is correct. It's unique, because I was having this near-death experience and being airlifted into the trauma center. And yes, Dr. Jeff O'Driscoll, who's actually become a dear friend of mine, we were introduced through the accident, but he and one of the trauma nurses experienced Tamara, my wife, she was deceased at the scene, but her spirit was in the ER room as the team of surgeons was working on me, and she literally communicated to Dr. O'Driscoll and to the nurse. And she was sharing her gratitude for what they were doing to save my life, which is exactly, when they told me that, I said, well, that's exactly what she would have done. And for clinicians like that, number one, to share that with me, which was so profound in my healing, and they didn't know me from Adam. They didn't know I had had a near-death experience or that I was hovering in those realms. They knew I was on the brink of death. It's funny, Jeff O'Driscoll laughs. He says, well, they say you had an NDE, a near-death experience. He says, we call it a DND. You were damn near dead, is what he said. He's a fun cowboy doc. But it was a profound thing. And Tamara and Griffin have been such a huge part. I've got two incredible guardian angels and another guardian here in Spencer, my son, in this realm. But Tamara has continued to come to me in dreams and visions, as has Griffin. And he doesn't come as a toddler anymore. He comes as this magnificent man, this magnificent young man. And yet it's so, life rolled on. I healed, I got back to work. I eventually fell in love and remarried. We adopted two boys who I don't call my adopted sons. They're just my sons. And great teachers, great support. In all the tragedy, I may be the luckiest man alive, to have found love twice and to have the not only angelic support around me, but the physical support. I mean, Spencer, I could call Spencer at any time, any day. He'd say, Dad, what do you need? I'll be right there. And that is not true of everyone. I'm very blessed.
Mm-hmm. You are. And she's visited, your wife has visited Spencer too, from that dream. I have no doubt that was her. So yeah, she's flitting in and out of there.
Yeah. She's looking out for everybody.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Other than that, I didn't have any other major questions because you've explained things so well. I guess that will be the end of it for now. So I'm so grateful that both of you agreed to be here with me today to share your stories and your points of view, to help others transform loss into grief and into a life filled with love and joy again. And because that's ultra important. That's what life needs to be, is sharing your love and living with joy. So how can the audience reach out to you? That would be one of the better things to ask. So if they need to get a hold of you or have something.
Yeah, the easiest way is Envoy Publishing, ENVOY publishing.com. And that'll give you links to everything I'm doing. Spencer's very involved with that. We're both on social media. I'm listed under my full name, which is Jeffrey C. Olson, and Jeffrey's spelled Jefffery, middle initial C, Olson, and I'm on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and all those places. Spence, how can people find you?
You can find me there as well on Facebook, just Spencer Olson with an E. So I'm on there as well.
Yeah. A lot of Olsons out there, so that's a great way to think about it. So for my beautiful viewers, I'll put all the information below under the video in the description area. And now as we head out for the day, I ask that everyone wake up each day with a sense of wonder, where you'll be guided and what you'll be shown and who will be placed in your pathway to assist you or for you to learn from, because life is the most magnificent, mystical adventure of souls, helping souls that you'll ever have. So don't forget to like and subscribe below. And thank you to both my guests, and goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
You bet. My pleasure.